Life. A constant ebb and flow of good and bad experiences. We spend hours scrolling, watching perfect highlight reels of people's lives. I've been a storyteller for 9 years. I have yet to meet a person who hasn't had a dark shadow cast over their soul from staring death or trauma in the face, myself included. In sharing my experiences, I've gained tools for days when those shadows get a little too dark. I'm Paulina Bucka, and this is not your typical mental health podcast. We all have a story. It's time to start using yours for your revival.
Welcome to wintering. Take stock of what you've given. Grieve what you won't get back.
Harvest from the seed of life. Time passes, yet it feels like no time has passed. We're suspended in space, caught in a micro moment in the grand scheme of things. It is neither good nor bad. It simply is. We took writing classes together. We had plenty of literature classes together. A decade ago, our paths twisted and turned and our days in class ended. We haven't been in the same state or even in the same room probably since college. At the foot of one closed door, a new beginning sprung forth. Shedding his collegiate persona, a budding poet emerged. In the cryptic words of blank pages, and a safe space to explore the wondrous caves of his mind. He didn't share his face then. His words instead took flight on the rising wave of Instagram. As he wandered, searching for himself, he welcomed the wintering, the bone-chilling duality of life to have come so far, yet to be nowhere still.
The only way to change what you're feeling is to feel it fully.
He stood at the edge of death and only found himself.
Meditate on what you'd like to cultivate in this downtime, so you may bring forth something new and true to your growth.
Please welcome Chris Ferreiras, author of The Sun Underground and All the Colors in Between, and my dear college friend. I knew then you were brilliant at writing, and now your Instagram following surely has also caught on and they know how brilliant you are, Chris. But we were just talking about entrepreneurship and life and kind of what this feels like for us, moving forward in our 30s now. So let's kind of go back to where we were in college and where it all started.
Yeah, let's get back to the beginning. I think that right now, in keeping with that theme of revival, I definitely feel a sense of ready to figure out what wants to come into the world right now in this stage of my life. Like you said, in our 30s, having come from way back when in college to where we are now. And I know you're also on the eve of starting this, which is so beautiful and such a, you've kind of went from your long, career and what you've built to sort of figuring out a pivot in a way, right? And I think similarly, I find that so much of being an artist is welcoming that pivot. For me as a writer, that's how it was in my 20s, since college. That's kind of how it unfolded for me, was just constantly, being present with the world and figuring out how the world needed me and what I needed from it and dancing with it and just staying responsive, right? And that's really what got me to where I am today.
Chris, I love how we have both used our English backgrounds and we've used them in very different ways, because I have spent the last 9 years telling stories of people who have felt trauma and who have gone through tragedies. And even here the last 2 years, I mean, there was I think a time block of about a month and a half or maybe 2 months where my mom and my brother would be like, do you have any other stories that you're doing that don't sound like you're writing an obituary? Like, that's all you write, is like you write about people's lives. You write about, who they were, how they, like, I was always, immortalizing somebody's life. And that's how I felt about news and storytelling. But when that stopped serving and when I felt like the storytelling was getting less and less and it was more and more about corporate and more about this grind, that's when I feel like the spark and the love of writing and the love of word went away, right? And so I think it's interesting because I've been watching your Instagram and recently I feel like you've been kind of going through this, like, do I do a name change? Do we do this? Do we do that? Like, you're kind of going through this metamorphosis yourself, and you've
Yeah.
had a great career with language and a great career with English.
Similar to you, I've been led by this relationship to kind of wanting words and story at the forefront of my life. And so I knew that when I was in college, I was kind of flirting with this idea of like, going down the PhD track and going and, teaching and, staying in academia. And I was, in many ways, I was being, vetted and supported by, the faculty at John Jay, who were very like supportive, and they saw a lot of potential in me in that path. And I had one professor who, she was a creative nonfiction professor, and I think she taught a couple of other things too, but that's where I ended up working with her initially. And she was one of the first professors at college that was like, hey, what do you want to do, and I was like, I actually really want to pursue a creative career. Like I had all this fire in me. I had all this, like, I was writing every day. I mean, ever since I figured out that I had this energy to share what I was experiencing and my views and, how I experience the world through poetic language. And I started sharing it on social media. I was like, oh, this is it. Like, this is how it happens, and I developed like almost like an obsession with it, of wanting to see what wanted to be said and putting it out into the world. And so much was happening at that time in the writing sphere on social media, right? A lot of up and coming young poets were taking to the platform. It was still relatively new on Instagram to share written posts or written text posts. And I had seen that, and I was like, yeah, this is kind of like, the future. Like, I know it was happening on Tumblr, but it was different because this was like the place that everyone was communing for. All the attention was on this app. And so when I initially started, I initially came in through my relationship to the myth of Icarus, and as that's kind of what inspired my Instagram name. It's a play on my name, Chris, and the phonetics of it, and then also the relationship to Icarus. So if you say that fast enough, Icarus, you hear my name in it. And So I kind of use that as my persona on social media for a little while, and that really helped me lean into the platform in a way that let me disappear just enough and gave me permission and license to kind of let my words take over without me having to overthink, oh my God, like how many people are going to know that this is me. And that gives you so much safety, right? To be able to tell your story, even if you need like a nom de plume or like an alias or something like that to tell your story. That's really helpful. So many, historic authors, and that's what they did, right? Because it's like putting on a mask gives you freedom to be who you are in many ways. And a persona, an alias, a name of your choosing is that same mask. It not only hides, it also protects. To kind of tie that back to, where I am now, I've been writing on social media and sharing my work for almost like what I want to say, almost a decade now.
At least the entirety of my news career, you have been there, and I've been in it for 9 years now. So yeah.
Yeah, coming up on a decade. That's wild. And a lot of the work that I share is a combination of poetic verses, flirting with like existential romance, thinking about the romance of being here, of being alive, of being a person, um, of having these experiences, but then also like, kind of highlighting the fleetingness and the impermanence of it. And I really value that as a philosophy, and that kind of trickles into my writing a lot. And it can also manifest as like affirmative language, right? So in many ways, I have a lot of affirmations because I know that existential thoughts can be really daunting too. And so affirmation is really important. I share things that I feel have a lot of valence for me, that I think will give someone else a prompt or permission to press up with those parts of themselves that are also experiencing that too, but maybe they didn't have a language for it yet. And that's really what got me to keep sharing on social media. From that, I developed my first book. I wrote it. I published it. I shared it with the world, and it was, really successful. A lot of people loved it, and that was really great. Now I'm on the foot of publishing my second one, so that's really exciting. I've developed so many relationships and friendships because of this. So many writers in my life now, so many authors in my life that I'm so grateful to know. I mean, so much of my network um, of writers and my community of writers and readers is from that platform, right? And it's from this gesture of sharing and not stopping. In many ways, I laid my foundation on that, and now I'm at a point where, kind of like how you mentioned the name change, now I'm at a point where I'm really trying to figure out how to move forward in a way that I think feels a little bit more authentic to my stride. I think the old name was really great for getting me through and ushering me through this decade. But now I'm kind of in a point where I'm really comfortable leaning into my own name and, really comfortable leaning into my own identity and the maturity that I think may come from that, and whatever that brings. And that's kind of, I think, where I'm at in this position of like, I've developed community, I have audience, I have these relationships, and I'm really grateful to have them. But in a way, I'm kind of like, well, now what? Where can I take this kind of online energy and put it in the world?
People really underestimate writing.
Yeah.
Every therapy I've done, writing is always at the core of it. And writing can reveal so much to you about you and your healing and where the hurt still lies. When we were in college, and I
Hmm.
was in a criminal justice major first because we went to a criminal justice school. I switched over to English, which was not really, we were like, what, one of the first or second graduating classes for English in our school.
Yeah.
I had just been going through my dad's suicide when I had switched over to English. And
Hmm.
all the classes that semester had some kind of theme of suicide, an author that had committed
Mm.
suicide. And so I feel like it was knocking me over the head. But what I found was solace in writing and solace in getting lost and kind of just being there with my thoughts and being able to scribble away what was happening in my life and not necessarily sharing it with everybody in class, but just being able to put what was here onto paper. So let's kind of talk about the power of the written word or just the power of words in general.
Thank you for sharing that too. I don't know that I knew that that's what you were experiencing when we were in college. And it illuminates so much, I think, of, your experience there, and also puts in perspective, just like we had these classes together, and just, how much we knew and didn't know about each other still, right? It kind of goes to show we know so much, but we can still remain such strangers, right? In such a beautiful way. All things kind of contributing to a sense of discovery. And at least that's how I see it. So I appreciate you sharing that. I think on the note of expressive of writing, it kind of brings me back to this study that I read recently, and I can't remember what it is. If I can find the information on it, I'll send it to you so you could put it in show notes or anything like that. But it's about expressive writing, and expressive writing as a tool for therapy, actually, for people to confront their own lives with language and to just let things come up. The power of storytelling in that regard, right, is so ancient. And like you said, oftentimes writing is underestimated. It kind of just seems to be this. We kind of tend to take for granted how much of what we experience on a daily basis begins as a thought on a page or begins as a word, or a note on your phone, or even a text, which to me is still a form of expression and writing, right? Like, how many times have we sent these long, insightful messages to our people, and we realize maybe a year later after reading it that it was like, oh damn, there's kind of some juice in this, right? Like, and that happened. At least that used to happen to me a lot. Where I would be like, oh yeah, like, damn, these conversations went deep. Yeah, the power of the written word is really transformative, and I think that in many ways it's our first, like, we come into the world with it. The first thing we do when we're born is we strive for sound, right? We're crying. We're trying to communicate. We don't have words. We don't have language. Our cries are the closest thing to that. And then eventually that sound arrives into a sense of order and structure and communication. And we can say what we need. We can say what we want. And then eventually that becomes words on the page, right? What do we need, right, from ourselves? What do we need from our surroundings, right? What do we feel in our world? What do we feel in our bodies? And I think in many ways, it's like everyone has a relationship to words, right? Whether they like it or not. Something that's really important for me as a writer, and also just like as a human, as a person, is just like reminding people that writing and speaking are not at odds. We can feel a lot of catharsis when it comes to expressing ourselves out loud, or like sharing our story out loud. But then, like, we can experience such a steep pressure when we finally get to the page and we decide to write instead. And we're just like, oh, so many people are like, oh, I'm not a writer, I'm not a writer, I'm not a writer. And it's like, well, if you can share your experiences out loud, if you can tell a story, then you are a writer. That for me is like really important. Is like bridging that gap, right, between the voice and the instrument of our choice. Part of this, power of the written word and is that it gives you agency. It reminds
Like
you of
that.
your own agency. It puts you back in your body and lets you know, I am here. And oftentimes our relationship to writing, the struggle that we face, is actually that it forces us to embrace, it forces us to face things, right? It forces us to see ourselves in the world and to sit with the discomfort of not having a language for it yet that we identify with. It is kind of like flirting with this unknown element, and that can be really intimidating for people. But it's also really empowering if you can stick with it.
Anytime that you have to go into your mind and then have to sit with it, that is intimidating, right? So to sit down and say, now here's a writing prompt and take what you have up here and put it on paper, that's scarier. That's because then now, like you said, you're taking authority over your life. The written word is powerful, but it's also scary. And I am here to challenge anybody that if you are writing or if you are journaling, that you should lean into it a little bit more.
Recently, I've been challenging myself to stay coherent on the page. Like I started to notice that perhaps like there might have been a little bit of a crutch that I developed around being just kind of like just writing whatever and there's still room for that. I still do that. But I'm also challenging myself to like, you know what? Write to myself. I'm trying to keep in mind in a way like my inner child, right? Like write to myself as if I was writing to my inner child, or write to myself as if I'm writing to a younger self, right? And so I've been doing that, and that's been really interesting because what's come up, and if I could be honest, what's really come up is that there is this unconscious wounding, right, from my youth, actually, that really wants healing. And the irony of the fact that the same thing that is wounded in me, or that was wounded and still lives with me, is asking of me in a way what life is also asking of me, right? And the parallel between trying to find a way to heal this part of myself and how perhaps in the process of acknowledging that part that needs healing, I am also finding the tools to navigate my life from here going forward. I found this old note that I wrote to myself, like in on my phone, and in it there was this visual of like, I don't know, like my body covered in hooks and strings and boulders at the end of it, and I was like getting further along, but it was kind of like, obviously there was a stretching that was occurring, right? The boulders were holding me back and they were transmogrifying my body and distorting it, and that visual really kept coming to mind as I was engaging and as I've been engaging with these old wounds, because it kind of does put in perspective how the things that you don't heal really can hold you back. And that's not, again, not like in a negative way either. I'm not shading that. And obviously there will always be something in us that needs healing, right? We came into the world kicking and screaming, right? It's not a surprise, and we were so sensitive when we were little, and you know God knows, the weird silly pains that we carry from the smallest innocent transgressions, right, from our youth. And then there are really real ones, right, like real abuse that we may have come from. For me, I'm a child of that, right, and I'm a child of a lot of love, but I also grew up through a lot of grief and a lot of loss, a lot of violence as well. And it's not a surprise to me that as I'm pressing against the future and what this decade looks like for me and what I want for myself as a man, what I want for myself as a partner, what I want for myself as a as a husband, what I want for myself as an artist. All of those things require me to contend with those parts of me when I was younger who engaged with those authorities in my life and maybe didn't have the best experience there, right? As I now decide to pick up the mantle, I have to interrogate how I've engaged with those who had that mantle. That's kind of what what writing is doing for me right now and how it's helping me pave the way is that in that it's making me or inviting me to really lean into um, those parts of myself that again not only need healing, but that also may need to be released in order for me to move forward. And that comes with its own slew of scary, and it's not easy, right? Sometimes you again, like you think you've arrived at the healed place, and then you find, nope, not there yet. Like we've come far, but we're not there yet. Yeah. And I don't know that you ever do get there, right? I think in many ways, maybe you do get, like, I don't know that, I think the idea of being fully healed is such a myth in itself, right? I think, you do what you can, you do what you can to keep going, and you do keep going and you get really far. And maybe the best way to track that is how you react in certain situations and how you respond in certain situations instead. But for the most part, I think that those parts are never completely lost. Maybe because they inform you going forward still. They keep you on the path.
I've been doing a lot of leaning into myself since
Mm-hmm.
reading news, and I think I needed to detox from news, really. So I took
Mm-hmm.
about 2 months off, didn't go on social media, didn't post anything, took everything down, and I needed to sit with me and figure out who I was and what I wanted to present to the world when I came back.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike you, I think my childhood was beautiful. But after
Mm-hmm.
my dad died, so in college, I cut my entire childhood off. And I said, I don't want to go back
Mm-hmm.
there because those memories seem so pure and innocent and nice compared to what life was like after my dad died, that it didn't
Mm-hmm.
feel like I wanted to go back into this like pure and innocent mode where I'm like, that doesn't even fucking real, feel real. Like who lives like that? And so I took my experience and I leaned into this renegade, if you will, or into this like really tough persona of like, I'm just gonna keep moving forward. And it helped, right? This like fuck you attitude was great because it helped me do my job. I'm fearless.
Yeah.
But the thing I'm
Yeah.
not fearless in is sitting with my emotions. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so in January, when everything happened and I started praying, walking, and then all of a sudden these doors started opening, and I started finding myself in rooms with people who, like myself, have used their trauma as a fuck you and
Mm-hmm.
have like made it,
Mm-hmm.
but some
Mm-hmm.
place and somewhere along that path have gotten stuck, right? And in
Mm-hmm.
all of the classes, Chris, writing has been the number
Mm-hmm.
one thing to get us unstuck. And all of
Yeah.
those classes have said, you got to go back, right? To those years,
Mm-hmm.
those days, your childhood, those places you don't
Mm-hmm.
want to go back to in order to move forward.
Mhm. There's a lot of unconscious parts of us that maybe may have felt, very small or unseen. And so there are these parts of us that are just like, I'm going to take up the space and I'm not going to budge. And that's so essential to get you to where you're going, right? I think part of being an artist is having a little bit of that. I'm not going to say, arrogance, but perhaps a little bit of that healthy ego. And I think that that's like, that has a place too. Like, I'm not one to demonize ego, right? I think there is something in the culture right now that's just like, yeah, ego bad, and like, being purely selfless, and having, I guess the opposite of ego is probably a better way to navigate the world. But I don't know that that's entirely true. I think even that idea of demonizing ego has a little bit of an ego about it too, right? It's like, look at me, I've got no ego, right? And that in itself is like an ego thing, which is ironic. But think back on, like, I had a conversation, one of my best friends, way back when, said to me one time when I was like working on my first book, one of the things that he said that was really valuable is, do you still find it fun to write, right? Like, because it should feel fun, it should be fun. And then he also said, do you feel like you're the greatest poet alive? And I'm like, relax. I'm like, relax. I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, if you look at like the biggest rappers, they come out and they posture as the biggest, they're like, I'm the greatest rapper alive. I'm the greatest rapper alive. You have a part of you has to believe that for you to actually lean into your artistic journey in some way. And it doesn't have to be that big where you're like, I think I'm the greatest painter alive, I'm the greatest artist alive, I'm the greatest rapper alive, I'm the greatest writer alive, whatever. It doesn't have to be that way, but it can be, I see art on the wall and I don't fuck with it. That's not, I don't know why that's there when I know that my work is just as good, if not better,
Right.
And why is my work not valid enough to be there, right? And I think that little bit of a rift, which again, it's not competitive. It's actually curious. You have a question, right? And I think it's the same with all kind of artistic journeys. It's like maybe you've seen a podcast, host, and you're just like, bro, who is this person doing this? Great for them. Cool.
I could do
Love
this
what you
too.
got going on, but I can do this too, right? And that's such helpful energy. It's like you see a person who is in a position of success doing what they're doing, and you're like, I've got that going on too, and I think I can do it my way. And that's healthy ego, right? I'm sure it can get really unhealthy very quickly too. But if you keep it in check, and if you have the right systems in place and the right community in place to keep you grounded and to keep you balanced and to affirm the right parts of you, you can make magic with that energy.
Man, listening to your story, so much of it takes me back to December when I started actually writing for myself. And that's a lie. I didn't start writing for myself. I started writing because I met somebody. It was said to me as a joke, let's write a smut book. And I was like, let's do it. Right. And so, like, you can't throw
Yeah,
something at a writer or like somebody
yeah,
who's
yeah,
creative and be like, let's just put it out into the ether and hope that it's like, just wanders out there. I'm like,
yeah,
let's do it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I had been sitting, I think since I want to say, I don't know, September, October, saying, I'm going to write something. And I had a couple of like really shitty experiences last year. And everybody kept saying to me, Paulina, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. And every time, Chris, I'd sit down and try to write, it was writer's block. And I was like, that's it,
Mm,
done. I take up my laptop and I put it away. I was like, I'm done with this. Then I meet somebody in December and they're like, let's write a smoke book.
I love it.
I was like, all right, let's do it. And so I started writing. And then I didn't stop writing, right? And then the book had about 150 pages in it right now. It's no longer a smut book, by the way. It has been deconstructed. It's no longer being written with who I was writing it with. But I think what it goes back to is in December, I was still in news. And when this all started, like you were talking about pseudonyms and kind of that true, authentic voice coming out, when I started
Mm,
writing, it took me back to college and it took me back to
hmm
like where I feel like I got stuck. So much of my development and so much of my brain, the career path and everything I've done has been from that time in college. And it's from that
hmm
moment when my dad died. And it's all been
hmm
in response in one way or another to what happened to me. I think when I started writing and I was like, well, I could write this under a pseudonym. And all this other stuff started bubbling up and coming to the surface. I was like, oh, hold on. There's a lot more here than just something, something stupid as like, let's make America come again. It's like, let's do, let's do something better with this.
America needs it.
America
America
needs
needs
it.
it.
Okay. I mean,
America needs it. America
listen,
needs a good orgasm,
to be clear,
honestly.
I think
Like,
that we should be talking about women's reproductive rights. We should be talking about that women
yes.
don't come enough. And it was funny
Yes.
because it was the
Agreed.
more males that we talked to about this book, the more they're like, "Wait, women really don't do this? Like, even
Yeah, they're like, what's
women are
that?
so unsatisfied in bed. Yeah, we are. Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it was fun to write this with a
Yeah.
male and hear
Yeah.
that male perspective as we were writing this. But
hmm
in it, like in the crux of the writing, there was so much more and there was so much depth to it that like the fun part of it, we needed to like shave down. And so when I started
Yeah.
to now shave this down and now really look at this writing, it's turned more into a prose, it's turned more into a poetry,
Mm.
not smut
hmm
anymore, but that
hmm
foundation and those
hmm
messages, they're real. I think writing unlocks a lot of that. I think writing gives us that
hmm
platform. Writing gives us
hmm
that, I don't know, I guess it and like pulls the curtain away for a moment and says, lean into it, see what this brings. And for me, it brought up a lot.
So much of like, language is just like, you're learning so that you can synthesize information and reiterate it back to a teacher. You're being taught material, but it's not really, and maybe somewhere in there you get a little bit of feedback around like, this is what I value. This is what I'm about, right? This is how I feel about this character from To Kill a Mockingbird, for the love of God. Like this is how I feel. you know, you
That's
know,
where we're going, To Kill a Mockingbird. We could have gone Shakespeare here.
I know. Yeah, I know. No, listen, I had big trouble. I had a
Much
lot of
ado about
struggle.
nothing, anything, no?
Yeah, yeah, I know. Yeah, seriously. Yeah, it'd be like let's throw Shakespeare under the bus instead. Actually, let's not throw Harper Lee. But I think to bring it back to like like what writing is that in many ways it's a vehicle for our unconscious to come into the world, right? And so there are things that are latent underneath the surface, bubbling up always beneath the surface, looking for a way into the world. And that could be, it's for the most part neutral. I'm not going to say it's negative or positive, but there are things in us that want to be expressed. There are things in us that want to come into the world, that want to experience the light of the surface world. That is this, the lived experience. And sometimes you meet the right people who alchemize those parts in us, and like a chemical reaction, they all the things start to spark, and all the things start to kind of like react to each other. And that could be eros, right? That could be the erotic force. Maybe you meet somebody, you have an intimate relationship with them, or you have, that could be platonic, or that could be romantic, and that catalyzes for you, oh, I have so much to say about love. I have so much to say about relationships. I have so much to say about being here as a lover, as a romantic, in a world where the art of romance seems to die, or seems to be dead, right? And the story wants to come into the world, and maybe it wants to emerge through, smut initially, and maybe that's exactly what it takes, is like the most kind of amplified version of that erotic energy for you to kind of disperse it into other aspects, and you know channel that eros into other aspects, right?
For me, it was so just drastically different from what I was doing, right? Like
Yeah,
news is so contained. News is so in a box. And I feel like
yeah,
for 9, 10 years as a creative soul and a being, I mean, the
yeah.
shooting and the editing and the writing, that gave me an outlet. So that was great. But
Mm-hmm.
still, I mean, you're coming up against times, right? Like, I mean, we have a minute 50 or a minute 30 really in news to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going out here and going, I want to do documentary style. I want to do like 5 minute
Mm-hmm.
stories, 6 minute stories. So like
Yeah.
I'm already pushing back. I'm already pushing the thing. So this, I think, for one, when I started writing this, the person I met, we weren't even in the same state. So I think that was really cool. So like there
Mm-hmm.
was a sexual energy, but there wasn't sex on the table. So I think that was
Yeah.
the really cool part about it. But for the other part of it was the fact that it was so just different from what I was doing that it let me lean into a part of myself that I think I suppressed for so long because
Mm-hmm.
news kept saying, in a box, in a box, in a box, in a box,
Mm-hmm.
in a box, in a box.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept putting fucking Paulina in a box, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
the thing. And as artists, we don't want to be in a box. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that, writing it under a pseudonym at first, and then um, just being able to get lost in that word and that writing was incredible. And for me, honestly, what the word did, the writing was fun, but it showed me what parts of myself still need healing and like what parts of
Yeah.
myself were holding me back from being in a healthy functional relationship and what parts of myself were limiting beliefs. And I don't think I realized that until I started writing again, and I took that
Mm-hmm.
writing and I shaved it down, kind of like, what is it, like the halal guys, right? Like trimmed
Yeah,
it
yeah,
back.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I got you. I
It's like
got
that
you.
I kind of like halal this smut book. And I
Yeah,
was like, okay, but
yeah,
where is my voice here? And the
yeah,
things that came up and what kind
yeah.
of started speaking through me was, damn, we gotta go back to college because we got 10 years of trauma we gotta go through,
We got to
girlfriend.
go
We're like,
back.
we gotta
Yeah,
go back.
yeah,
Chris, the last time I let myself be creative and let myself feel in the way that I felt when I was writing was in
yeah,
college. And the last time I felt and what I felt in college was pain, right? Because of what I was going through with my dad and like grief and all of this. So I think for me, it was I never wanted to go back mentally to college. I never wanted to go back into a writing career like that because for me, it was just like I don't think I could survive it, but I
Mm,
can, right? Like that's the
mm-hmm.
beauty in it that like when you go back to it 10 years later, you come with a different perspective. And so that writing really can show you how to find peace in the broken and peace in what happened. And that's kind of what you do right now with a lot of people that
Yeah.
you workshop with.
Yeah, so the people that I workshop with come from all, I mean, not to use the cliche, but from all walks of life. But that really is the case. I get attendees from all over the world, depending on, like thankfully my reach on social media, extends beyond, just our time zone. So it's pretty great.
I sent you a couple of messages. I'm like, Chris, this girl in Sweden I follow.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, totally. I was like,
I
I
like
think she's
geeked
still,
out.
yeah,
And I was like,
yeah.
I know that person.
Like we were in class together. We were in class together. That's
He's a
great.
badass
Yeah.
then. He's a badass
Yeah.
now. I love it.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's that same, yeah, it's that
Yeah.
enthusiasm that's kept me going. Okay, Paulina. It's, yeah, the only reason I'm still writing today is because I'm waiting for more messages like that. So, no, I'm just playing. But,
Send your
but
messages to
yeah,
your friends. They
yeah,
need it. They
yeah,
need love and
exactly. Yes,
support.
exactly, exactly.
Power
Let
of
it
the
be
written
known.
word.
Yeah, yeah, no, real talk, real talk. I remember one day, not to flex or whatever, but I got a message from somebody, and it was like a photo, and they had said like, "Yo, are these your words?" And I'm like, and I see the aesthetic, and I see, oh yeah, of course it's my words, and then I see who posted, who like reposted it, and it was Khloe Kardashian. And I was like, "Yo, get the hell out of here! What are the odds of that?" But it was in her story, and
Okay.
you know, it wasn't. She didn't tag it or anything like that, or and that is what it is.
But
I
it's
was
still
just really.
there.
It's just wild to think that like my words could reach through the internet in the way that they did to somebody, whoever it is. Maybe somebody's running her social media account. Maybe it was her. I don't care. All I know is that it reached that,
It
you
got
know,
there.
that wave, yeah, that wave, that tier, I suppose, of society. And so that's pretty cool. So on that note, a lot of people from different careers and you know, different parts of their journey in life join my workshops. They initially started online, and you know, it was kind of like you know, just a way of again bringing everyone together who I had been communicating with and you know, gathering with online for so long in other ways. And this was just like a really good way, I think, to meet my people, you know, meet who was there. Surprisingly, some journalists come through, some actors come through, you know, people who are in the world, I think, finding their way come through, right? Wanderers, if you will. Photographers come through. You know, anyone from any walk of life has found themselves in this workshop. We are moving through the world with very little tools. And so that's one feature of like some of the things that trickle into these workshops is how can we, with our words, with our language, with our relationship to self-expression, you know, find a way to transmute what we know about the world and what we know about where we are, and find gold in the lead, right? Find lightness in the heavy, find clarity in the chaos. Coming together is such a beautiful way to do that, because you realize that, you know, there's a writer in, you know, in Egypt right now, and there's a person in India, and there's a person in, you know, Germany, and there's a person here, you know, in Toronto, or there's a person in New York, or there's a person like you know, who comes together, and we realize, oh, we all share common ground, even if we're not, even if we didn't know each other prior to this workshop. That's been really meaningful to me, to be able to facilitate these, to hold this space for people to, I think, come and share their experiences, and then find language for it, find avenues for it, where again, it begins with a passion and with a question, and then we find avenues for it. Is this prose that we want to channel it into? So I have prompts for prose, I have prompts for poetry. I think that so much just wants to be expressed, right? If not from, you know, if not on a collective unconscious level, then on a very deeply personal level. But I do find that writing and, you know, landing on the page and spending time with the written process is a really good way to kind of use active imagination and dream of a better world and make it possible. Actually, what begins as a word doesn't end there. It, you know, usually translates into experience. It translates into action. It translates into movement through the world. Everything that has movement has gravity, right? And if you start making a movement of your actions, you'd be surprised how much it actually incites other people to join you, right? And it inspires them. That's what inspiration is in many ways, right? And so I think it's really important that, you know, I think everyone leans into the reality that they are storytellers and that they have that function in them, and not to shy away from it, even if it's, you know, of course it's going to be uncomfortable, right? Anything, I think anything worth connecting with begins with tension.
I like that.
Attraction is tension, right? You know, if you feel attracted or called to do something with your life, that's tension, you know, and it begs the question, I feel it here, but then what's over there? What's pulling me? What's pulling me, right? What's at the source of that tension? And I think leaning into that question with curiosity and having the right tools, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be writing. If you're an artist, you know, and you paint your way, across that distance, if you're a singer and you sing your way across that distance, if you're a creative person and your creative outlet is even, something alternative to that, that's fine too. I think it's really just about finding, what helps you close the distance between you and that source of tension. Writing seems to be my way, or it seems to be our way right now. And that's kind of what I'm leaning into.
The word that comes up for me when you were speaking was community, Chris. Um,
Mm,
it is so important for all of us to find our community. And I think in our
hmm
20s, it's easy to get lost because you're trying to find yourself in your 20s, right? And I think your 30s are about finding your community. Your 20s are about kind of going out there, doing the wild, going in and out of, this fails, cool, I'll try something new. This starts, this was successful, cool, I'll keep going. But your 30s are about that community, and your 30s are about getting those people around you who are like-minded, or people who can challenge you, who can kind
hmm
of pull you or push you into that tension a bit and say lean
hmm
into it, because that's going to lead you to the path that you want. The more tension I find in my life, the better the outcome. I mean, entrepreneurship is not easy. Sitting, getting fired and saying, I'm not going to freak out, and I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to cry. It's not easy. Going out and saying, I'm going to take a 2-hour walk and start praying, and I'm going to start thinking about what I can do and then writing. That's not easy, right? But you find your community in all of it. You had sent out a newsletter. Obviously, I follow you. Um, and it was interesting because we had spoken that same morning, and I think the words from where we are in two different states and from far away time zones, everything is different. We're still the same. And
Yeah,
you're writing in that prompt, it said, the writer that goes in is not
yeah,
the writer that comes out on the other side. The
yeah,
Chris that
yeah,
walked in 10 years ago to this writing project online and the
yeah.
teacher and everything was not the same Chris that is today. The
No.
writer that walked in, the journalist that walked in 9, 10 years ago is not the same journalist and person I am today. Today, we all want to share those stories.
Something that brings me a lot of solace is the sense that at our core, I think somewhere between who we are and what we are becoming, there's also the space for revealing. And I think that who I started as a writer and who I am now, the transformation that occurred has only in many ways to kind of bring it back to that metaphor of trimming and shaving
Mhm.
and removal
Hello,
and
guys.
and shedding. Yeah, halal guys. Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah,
I think
the
I'm
cutting, the
hungry.
trimming. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it could be. I think you miss New York. I think there's all this shedding that occurs, and I think that part of what the and that's part of alchemy, right? Like, the process of turning one thing to another thing is that the chemical reaction between two elements oftentimes reveals the purest possible denominator of a thing. And I think that it's the same for the human experience, where you can look at becoming as like, I am becoming something new altogether, right? But I tend to gravitate or lean more into the metaphor of how, inside inside the caterpillar, you see evidence of the chrysalis, and inside the chrysalis, you see evidence of the butterfly. And that's literal, right? They're the lining on the inside of these little creatures. It seems to have the blueprint for the next thing. And I think about that with ourselves as well, like where
That
here I
blueprint.
am, that blueprint, right? Like there is something inside me right now that has the blueprint of what I will be next. And I don't know yet, right? That's part of the black box between us and ourselves, is that we don't know. If we knew, there would be no tension. We would just know. It would be kind of just like what we know about ourselves now, right? We would not be moving forward. We would just be able to navigate backward, kind of like in memory. And that has valence, absolutely. But it's about the forward moving energy, right? What's going to move us into making more decisions? What's going to move us into being agents of our own lives? What's going to move us into a state of more revealing? When you lean into what you do, your creative process, and who starts the thing and who shows up on the other side, or who emerges on the other side, I think what it reveals is that there was something always there anyway. And I think that what you make or what you create, what surfaces from it, was deep down, the reason you can recognize it and say, yeah, this is it. I'm done. I think it's complete. I think it's ready, is because deep down, even though you were kind of, chiseling out as I think, what was it, Michelangelo chiseling out the angel from marble, the idea that the angel was always in there. Um, the block of marble could have been anything else, of course, but what you make and what decides to surface, I think, it reveals something that is always in you too. I think that's one of the most beneficial aspects and one of the most meaningful and significant aspects of the creative act or the creative journey, is that it does let you press up with things or press up to things and meet things, that you suspected were there, but now you actually know for sure, and you can actually see it or witness it or engage with it outside of your inner inner world.
The power of art. So one of the things that I had ended up writing out of that smut book, one of the things that this person had said to me when I had broken off this friendship, this partnership, whatever it was, I said, what's missing for me is that writing is emotional. And that while
Mm-hmm.
we are not in a relationship, I need there to be some kind of connection. If there's not, then you can't be part of this
Mm-hmm.
project. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
to be clear, I mean, sex is emotional, right? So if we're writing a sex
Mm-hmm.
book, there's got to be some emotional
Mm-hmm.
aspects to it. But then for me, writing is even more intimate than just sex
Mm-hmm.
almost. So
Mm-hmm.
so when this person was like, it doesn't have to be emotional, I was like, then we don't really have to be writing a book. You
Yeah,
know, like
yeah, yeah,
if you don't
yeah.
understand that art and writing is about emotion and the other person and like
Mm-hmm.
what it can evoke in the next person, and you
Mm-hmm.
haven't experienced art because it can
Yeah.
be anything. It can be anything. That marble could have been anything. That book could have been anything. But if you look at it, the message and the finished product, that is really what's going to drive people in, and it's generally that emotion that you see in art that brings people in.
It kind of brings me back. I wrote something recently. I think it goes like, the thought that this could have been anything else, and the realization that it couldn't have gone any other way. The thought that it's like, if you're going to create a work of art, or if you're going to lean into your craft, and you're really in it, I think, for the reason of creating connection with yourself, or again, just having a relationship to the parts of you that are curious about what wants to come into the world, especially if it's coming from a place of, your relationship to storytelling has been kind of more, I would say, has been effective, has been meaningful, has been significant, but it's not, kind of having that emotional, depth that you want it to have, right? And oftentimes that seems to be the thing that invites, many of us, I would say, maybe in this decade of our lives, but it invites many of us, I think, after being on a path for a very long time, is that it becomes so, transactional, right? It becomes transactional, and there's nothing wrong with that if you appreciate that, if you value that. But if you don't care about that, if you don't want that transactional thing anymore, then you don't want it in any aspect of your life at all. You're so done with that as a currency of movement. So many people, I think, can, for example, curse their career because it was so money driven or whatever else, and it's like, yeah, valid, valid, but also not to mitigate the feat that it takes. Like, that's sacrifice as well. But what you do find on the other side of like deep sacrifice for in one direction is the need to meet the other side of it, right? And it's kind of that weird need for balance. It's like you're down the path where it's like it's so clinical or transactional or even sterile, we might say, right? And you need something that has texture again. You need something that does not have the same structure, that does not have the same, strict order, right? That you're so used to. That doesn't feel so formulaic or algorithmic. You want something raw. You want something that means something. And so when you do find a collaborator, and I think to bring it back, I think to, your experience with this, other person, when you do find a collaborator, and that could be anyone. It doesn't even have to be someone that you're collaborating on a book with. This could be a curator, right? This could be a person who has ideas for your work, and they see potential in it, but maybe their idea or vision seems like you guys are on par, but then you realize, you're not, at some point. I think part of what causes that rift or causes that split is, our, desire to have a sincere connection to the thing that we are making, especially on the other side of like moving through something that we did not feel that sincerity toward anymore. Right. And I think there's such a need, right? Especially I think maybe in this decade of our lives, for many of us who have, sacrificed so much of our energy and time, surviving through our 20s, trying to figure things out, and figure really seeing how our efforts and gestures land on our bodies, realizing in perhaps in this decade, that it's like, oh, I know how I want to lead my life now. I know what it was. I have a sense of what I value now. But at first I didn't. Now I know. And now that I know, I can't not know. I can't go back and not know. Right. And I think that's part of the, it's like a damned if you know, damned if you don't know situation where it's like, ignorance is bliss, but also like, you wouldn't choose ignorance anyway. Right. Is that like once you know that something's missing from your life, you see it everywhere. You see it's palpable that there's an absence. It's like the absence becomes a presence. And oftentimes that absence is, again, the need for connection, the need for something sincere, the need for something honest, the need for something raw, right? And, again, writing doesn't always have to be have to be the way that we get there, but I'll tell you this much: writing will definitely reveal the need for that if you do lean into it. I think that's part of what makes it so intimidating for many of us, right? Is again, what will it reveal exactly? What will it reveal? And what does it say about the course that I'm currently on, right? It really forces you or invites you actually, to become an agent of your own life, right? To develop a sense of like, I'm the person behind this pencil or pen. I'm the person behind the keyboard. I'm the person behind the wheel, right? I'm the person behind my eyes, right? And there is no other person that's going to do for me what I can do for me, right? And if I can't do this, right? If I can't even sit with this discomfort, then who can I sit with really, right? Then what can I sit with really, right? And I think you come to a realization like that, and it kind of it throws a wrench in your whole shit. You're just like, you're just like, okay, like, yeah, I've got to reevaluate a lot.
For a long time, I wasn't telling my story authentic way I could. And
Mm-hmm.
for writing, it gave me that agency. And I think, like you said, if you
Mm-hmm.
can't sit with it, and for a long time, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to sit with myself. I didn't write about
Mm-hmm.
my stuff until I did in the most,
Mm-hmm.
asinine, backwards way. But it made
Mm-hmm.
me sit there. It made me kind of take that moment of, all right, maybe we gotta work
Yeah,
through a
yeah,
couple of things here, like
yeah.
and it's beautiful. It's beautiful what comes up if you let yourself feel. It's beautiful what comes up if you lean into it. And it's that revival, Chris. I think that again, it goes back to those words that you were saying. The artist and the writer that goes in is not the artist that comes out. It's a different person. And that writing journey started in December when I was still in news. And then I was like, oh, we're gonna write this under a pseudonym. By January, I wasn't working in news. So then the idea changed. But where we are today, by God, I wouldn't go back. You know what I mean? Like every step had to happen to get me to where I am today, but it all started with writing.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I'm really happy that function and that process came to you when it did, and that when it did and how it did, like, you might call it asinine or backwards or whatever, and fine,
Whatever it
call it
is.
that. But whatever it is, yeah. But the reality is, I think that it's like the way that you come into a thing sometimes is just that. It's just the way that you come into it, right? And it kind of makes me think about how, like, I don't know, sometimes like you meet someone very briefly, and you don't even realize that they're going to be a part of your life until next thing you know, it's in whatever season of your life makes it possible. You guys are now in each other's lives a little bit more closely, a little bit more proximally, right? And it kind of, I feel like that sometimes with like creative practices and creative processes. You'd be surprised to find that if maybe, like a decade from now, you're going to revisit something from your childhood that was also a creative part of you. And you're going to be like, oh, I touched on this when I was a kid, right? Maybe it was a little bit of songwriting. Maybe it was a little bit of painting. Maybe it was a little bit of acting. Maybe it was a little bit of something else, something theatrical, something that you just touched on, literally so brief. And now all of a sudden you find this function wanting to resurface into the world. And so I do think that it's like the way that you come into your creative practice, it's just kind of like touch and go sometimes, but that doesn't mean that just because you let it go it doesn't return. I think that even for something like that, like you do realize, oh, I have all this kind of like erotic force, right? And whether that erotic force is literal, right? Like, you're actually in the world, moving with eros, and really what that is just love, big love, right? And you have this big appetite or big hunger, and that's real. But then also that, it's not a surprise to me that it's like that erotic force emerged for you in the creative function, right? Like in the creative field. You're hungry for your own creative potential. I think that if we were to kind of zoom out and look at it as a metaphor, that's really what I'm viewing. It's like, smut book or not, it was an invitation to just have a sexy time with your creative process, right? Like make it sexy, right? And I think that's great.
That was the appeal to it, right? That
Yeah.
it was sexy, it was different. I have Vanessa who's on this podcast later too, and she when
Hmm.
when I told her I was writing this, and we go to church together on Sundays, by the way. So I said, Vanessa, I'm writing a smut book. She goes, say it, come again. I was like, well, that's what we're trying to do, actually.
Yeah. You're like, that's the point, actually. Yeah, that's the goal. That's the goal.
She's like, no, no,
Yeah.
no. I was like, well, we're writing
You're
it
like,
under a
yes.
pseudonym. This would be great. And then,
Yeah.
but again, you were talking about like the things that come up from childhood. When I went
Hmm.
halal on this motherfucker,
Yeah.
and then the writing, the true authentic voice came out. A lot of
Hmm.
my childhood came out. Like I said, those
Hmm.
experiences came out, and don't discount the process. Don't
Yeah.
discount the process. I think is really
Yeah.
like the roundabout
Yeah.
way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also don't discount it, but also like don't like, don't shame the way that it appeals to you, right? The initial way that it appeals to you or the way that it comes in. Obviously, like we all have to process things the way that we need to. And, that is very deeply personal. It's not going to look like, it's not going to look the same to everybody, right? I think like you said, we all have within us kind of unconscious wounds that want to be that want to be seen and leaned into and known. There's a lot of wonder to find there, right? And a lot of beauty to find there. And I think that oftentimes we can get so in our heads, and we have such a matrix of shame in our lives with the specific things that attract us, right? Like whether that might be a genre or whether that might be a topic, or whether that may be, again, an avenue of self-expression, that it's like maybe unconsciously, again, we might have heard our mothers or fathers or parents, our people, saying, like for example, you'll never make it if you do that thing, right? Or nobody makes money doing that thing, or
A writer,
everyone,
a
yeah,
creative.
yeah, exactly, or that's like a pipe dream that's never
Right.
gonna happen, right? And I think deep down, when you start to kind of press up against it, depending on, you could either be a renegade about it, and I think all artists are, have that renegade function in them. But even then, it still can come to some with a little bit of a tinge of shame initially, where it's just like, damn, I'm doing the thing that disappoints my family. I'm doing the thing that disappoints how I was raised. And I think to be a great artist is also to be a great disappointment, right? And I don't mean that in a negative way.
I love
I
that.
mean that in the most positive way. You have to disappoint. You can't be what people expect you to be, right? You can't even be what you expect yourself to be, right? Because these are just, projections that we put onto ourselves anyway, right? But I think the creative process really does, it shaves you down, right? It forces you to really see, and discover. right? And that requires you to be humble, but also welcome what you don't know about yourself and know yourself there, right? And know yourself that way. There's just such a matrix of shame around art making. And I think that that's, especially when it comes to, art making, really what we're talking about is life making. And there's no room for shame in life making. You're never too old to try. It doesn't matter what it is. Like, you're never too old to try. In fact, like, that's kind of what keeps you alive, right? Is the will and the drive to try something new. And I think that when you are on the page, you are being pressed up with trial and error, right? You're quite literally, does
Your
this word
life.
work for what I'm,
Yeah.
yeah, my life? Like, does this word work for me? Does this value that I just expressed work for me? Does this direction that I'm going work for me? And what is a sentence if not meaning going in a certain direction, right? And what is life if not just that, right? In so many ways, there's just so much overlap between, our relationship to language on the page and our ability to follow that language into a life that reflects who we really are. Again, there's so much scary power in that. And scary doesn't have to be scary, right? I think it's allowed to also be erotic. It's allowed to be hot. It's allowed to be energetically charged. Think about it when it's like you're attracted to someone. That's scary, right? It's like, what could remind you of you being in your body more than like seeing someone who like, or having a relationship or a connection to someone that really makes you feel like self-conscious, right? Not in a negative way. Again, just you see that person and you're like,
Vulnerable.
oh, I'm here. Exactly. Vulnerable. Exactly. I think that's it. That's very much the currency, right? Of, vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is the currency.
Thanks for watching, and that's okay. Join us next week on Wednesday for another episode. In the meantime, subscribe below, like, comment, and share, or find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Until next week.